All right. Here we are.
I had the mug in front of my face.
Welcome to our new studio. I want to back up a little bit. So this is pretty cool. I'm going to go back to where I can see the live view. All right. This is just the graphic. It's not actually on the wall. And the reason I have it there is because if I knock it out, you'll see there's this little dot right there.
I wondered if you could see that.
That's a screw that's holding up the wall. If I could zoom this camera out and show you the entire studio.
Are you gonna fix that?
Actually, there's a way I could. I may eventually. I could show you the FaceTime camera. It's not a great angle, so just heads up. So if I go to the FaceTime camera, it's like pointing right at the.
Yeah.
But you can see that this is just like a wall. There we go. So you can see that this is just a wall in our garage. There's our garage and our workout equipment and some shelves and a bunch of stuff. So, but when you put it back on the camera, it's just like whatever what the camera sees is all that matters.
Well, and you're kind of in transition too. We're trying to build your studio out here, and so we have a lot of things to store that we need to get storage for. So not like a storage space, like a small shed that we can put things out there.
Definitely not getting a storage space again.
No. We don't have that much stuff. So this is all stuff that could fit in a shed. It's like old music equipment and stuff that Ben doesn't want to get rid of because someday.
I just realized that thunderstorms are happening.
Oh, good. Well, we better get started.
Starting soon. So we're going to, so if it just goes dark all of a sudden, it's probably because.
I guess that's part of the problem too, is being out in the garage. There are no windows, but then you can also hear the rain and thunder and stuff a little better. Yeah,
I am going to be like, I'm putting my thing up, my script up there on the teleprompter. I'm going to be doing some insulation and stuff in here to kind of dampen some of that, but
well, you have to because it's too hot in here.
It is. All right. Well, are you ready to dive in?
Yep.
Let's get started. Hello and welcome to In the Boat with Ben and Rachel. I'm Ben.
And I'm Rachel.
And this podcast exists to address common creator struggles and provide weekly inspiration for your creator journey. And today we're tackling a subject that's directly related to creativity. Mm-hmm. We kind of do. Sometimes we talk about creativity. Sometimes we talk about productivity. Sometimes we just talk about life and trying to survive.
Yeah, we're a constant state of evolution. So.
Yeah. So today's episode, we're actually talking about curiosity and the role that curiosity plays in creativity. I don't know about you, but I was a super, super curious kid.
Oh yeah, me too.
I was fortunate I grew up in California and kind of just in a suburban neighborhood like this one, and that was fine. But I spent 3 years living out in the country in Colorado. And when I think about my curiosity and kind of the timing of when I lived in Colorado, it was around that time where my curiosity and my creativity started to really work together more. Like I started to mature a little bit into this ability to synthesize my ideas. And so So when I think about curiosity and I think about discovery and adventure and kind of some of those themes, I think a lot about that time in Colorado, living on 20 acres and exploring the
Mm-hmm.
woods and learning things about the indigenous people who lived there first, and uh, figuring out what life was like living on a farm and raising cattle. And it was a really interesting time.
Mm-hmm.
And then I moved to Texas and lived in a small town, and my brother and I, when we were in school, we were just kind of like running around all over the place. And that was the time when I was really starting to get curious about music and
Mm-hmm.
exploring that kind of thing. And so it's really, curiosity has been a major part of what I think of as my creative journey, um, and even to today.
Mm-hmm.
What about you?
I mean, I was a very curious kid too, and had a very large imagination. And my brother and sister and I would go explore places. We had a fort, and ran through cow fields and all kinds of things. I mean, I have fond memories of those times too. But I think when I think of curiosity for myself, I think most often about going to the library and picking
Mm-hmm.
up books. And it wasn't just fiction books, even though I'm a mostly fiction writer. I was curious about a lot of things. And so I would pick up nonfiction books that would, you know, teach me about. I was very enamored by the indigenous stories and the myths and mythology. I read a lot of that stuff when I was a kid. I was very curious about animals and about science and some of those things. And I feel like the curiosity drove me to pick up books where I could dive deeper into that stuff than I was even learning in school. History was a really big interest of mine. And so sometimes I would read a fiction book and there would be something that would spark my curiosity, like something that a character said or some place where they lived. And I wanted to know more about that. And I would follow it. And I still do this to this day. Like when I think of curiosity, I think about how there are these little nuggets of things that get caught in my brain, and it just makes you wonder and you want to know more about it.
Yeah, yeah. That's kind of where I wanted to go next. Was I wanted to ask you, how do you experience curiosity today? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of a cliche, or a trope, maybe, that this idea that, like, as a kid you're really curious, and then as you become an adult
Mm-hmm.
you lose that curiosity and you become really practical. And I feel like, for myself at least, I've held on to my
Mm-hmm.
curiosity, and
For the
it's
most
it's
part.
evolved and changed in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
What has that been like for you
I
as
think
an adult?
I think there was a time. I mean, I've always worked in a creative career. So even when I was right out of college, I was a journalist for a while. And you have to question things when you're a journalist. You have to be curious about what makes people do what they do
Hmm.
and why certain things happen. And I think I tailored it more for the job. And then when we had kids, I feel like it opened up for me because I could see how there was just such wonder with the kids. Like I specifically remember this one time when our oldest he was like just lagging behind on the way to school. And it was because he kept seeing things that interested him in the grass. And then he would stop and look at the tree bark, and he would like say things like, this looks like whatever, like using it as there was one time we were really late to school, and they were looking at worms because it had just rained, and they were looking at what the shapes the worms made and stuff. And I think they opened in me just a deeper level of curiosity where when our kids would ask us questions, I'd be like, oh, I've never wondered that. I don't know. So now I want to investigate.
Yeah.
So I think it kind of kept me in the curiosity mindset and in the open mindset, because I think in order to have curiosity, you have to have an open mind. And realize that you don't know everything about everything, and you don't even know half of everything.
Well, yeah, and
So
that whole thing about like the more you learn, the more you realize you don't understand and
you don't
and
know
you don't know.
anything. Yeah.
And as silly as it sounds, that I've just found that to be true so many times.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that you kind of get into the kids. I think about our kind of early marriage stage before kids, um, being being an adult just out of high school,
Mm-hmm.
and that time in my life.
Yeah, we married young.
Well,
I mean,
I'm talking about the
we were
period
college,
just
but
before we were married
yeah,
and just after we were
yeah,
married, before kids. And I know I was, I've always been a curious
right.
person, and I think there's kind of like this inherent personality.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I noticed something as we had kids, and they started to ask questions, and I think this might be some kind of cultural conditioning in some ways. My mindset going into parenthood was I'm the one who has to have the answers now.
Yeah.
I remember feeling really overwhelmed when I started out on my own because I didn't understand how finances worked, and I was like,
Mm-hmm.
how am I gonna figure this stuff out? I had this, and so becoming a parent, I had this overwhelming sense of like I'm supposed to be the one with the answers now. Um, and so I wouldn't let myself, like, if there was a question, I wouldn't let myself say I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I and and it was part of it was I think because of that belief that like I had to have the answer.
I think I think they asked me so many questions that I sometimes I would just say I don't know because I didn't want to answer anymore. I
I don't
got
know.
really good at saying I don't know.
Well, and it was kind of equal parts. I I felt like I needed to have the answers, and two, like it also felt kind of good to
Mm-hmm.
be able to
To be the
tell them
one who knew.
something
Yeah.
and they'd be like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
you know. um, but I over time I started to realize the value of saying I don't know. One, I accepted, I began to accept this idea that I serve my children better by being honest about what I do and don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you have to have the answer, when you have to be certain, um, you don't leave any room for the truth or for reality. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
like if you ask me a question and I don't know the answer, but I tell you something as if I do, that's the end of that road, and curiosity has nowhere to go from there.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know is actually, it's kind of like a gateway for
Mm-hmm.
curiosity.
Yeah.
It's a good thing. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think having kids and just all of the questions that come from them really helped me shift that
Yeah. Well, and
understanding.
just keep in touch with your own curiosity too, because I think as we become, I mean, science actually shows that as we become older, we get a little more closed-minded because we think we know so much, you know. Um,
I hope that's what it is, and it's not like maybe there's some biological component to that.
no, I don't think so. I think it's more like a psychological thing.
Yeah, like
Um,
a belief that the older I
yeah,
get,
the wiser
the
I
wiser
am.
I am, the
Yeah.
more I should know.
But I think, you know, it's kept us on our toes, and it's kept us in touch with that curiosity because we do question things, and we do, and I feel like in order to have a healthy relationship with curiosity, we have to be comfortable with questions, and we have to be comfortable with asking, why is this the way it is? And, you know, what is the meaning behind it? And what is the history of, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
It's like asking those questions in my job too is, I mean, we're going to get into this, I'm sure, but it's just vital to
Yeah.
ask those questions, you know?
It just it popped into my head just a second ago, the whole like why, like
Yeah,
that
the
that
way kids do.
question.
Yeah, why?
And then
And you answer it.
it's
Why?
the why. Yeah.
Yeah. Until you
Um,
get down to, well, I don't know. Maybe I should check that out, you know?
yeah. We do this with each other too. I've noticed, like, talking with one another, if one of us is struggling with something, or um, we've I think we've learned kind of instinctually to try to find the deeper layers
Yeah.
of why we're thinking a certain way, or why we're worried about something,
Yeah.
because almost all the time it's not just what we see on the surface. And so there's tremendous value, just like in communication and relationships, having a curiosity based approach. So I want to shift gears and talk about creativity. That we were talking about this before we started recording, kind of in preparation. I really liked some of the ideas that came out of what creativity is, and kind of the nature of creativity. And so I was saying that creativity doesn't just happen without having inspiration. Like, you can't just create from nothing. Your creativity is it ends up being a synthesis of the things that you consume, and the ideas that have inspired you, and things that you enjoy, and so it comes, like, there's kind of this fueling that happens in a number of different ways. But does that feel like a accurate?
Yeah. I mean, I think I would add to it that we can't be as creative as we would like to be if we are only sticking to the same things too. So, as an example, like, writers are always told, write what you know. And what that means is, write the emotions that write the things that have happened in your life. But I can write 100 stories about growing up without a dad. But what about the 101 story that I want to write, So I have to be experiencing different things and being curious about what is it like to grow up in a family where you have a healthy relationship with your parents, and so those questions can open creativity for us, and they can open new pathways to the things that we create.
Yeah, I don't know, like, I'm having trouble making it as relevant to what I do creatively, because for writing, curiosity seems like a really vital skill.
Yeah.
Like, I think about, so there's so many books out there where a character was written, and you can tell this isn't an author writing from what they know. It's an author writing from what they assume to be true about somebody, based on little bits and pieces that maybe they picked up.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can see the influence of culture and media and stuff like that. There's a specific author, I'm not going to mention their name or the book.
I know who you're talking about.
But they're writing from the perspective of a different gender, and you can just tell, it's like and nationality and everything. And you just tell, like,
they're not a part of this.
It's not just that it's not like an authentic representation.
Yeah.
It's like, did you
ask
spend any time
about
asking questions? So
Yeah.
I feel like the authors who are curious, who are like, I can, like, I could sit here and I could, from my own assumptions, I could describe a person who's different from me in every way, but I can't do that accurately unless I'm curious and I'm asking questions about who these people really are, and what their experiences are.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's why curiosity, especially as an author, someone who tells stories and has characters, like, is really important.
For my research alone, that requires curiosity, because I'll I'll go down like huge rabbit holes. Sometimes I have to pull myself out because it's just so much. I mean, I've done research on the history of women in the United States, and the history of women in religion, and the history of women in, you know, like all of these things that I have read and digested. And because I'm curious about why we are where we are and how I can apply that in a book, you know?
Yeah.
I was thinking of, I have a magazine that I picked up. Do you remember this? When we were at the grocery store and I saw a magazine about witches, and I was like, oh, I've already read so much about witches, but I want to get this magazine about witches because, you know, I'm still planning to write a witch book. And,
Yeah.
you know, and so like just being curious about the history of witchcraft and the history of, you know, the Salem witch trials and things, like, it's just, all of it is fascinating to me. And sometimes I feel like I have to pull myself out of that curiosity and be like, okay, it's time to write.
You know, there are a lot of examples like that, though, because when I think about witches, I think about what I remember learning in school about the Salem witch trials,
Yeah.
and then, you know, what I've seen on TV and what I've heard people
There's
in
a whole other story
like
to all of it, but
religious circles talking about like modern witchcraft and that kind of thing. And so like I've just got these little bits and pieces, but I don't actually understand unless I investigate and unless I like am curious. It's so, I think it's so tempting in our culture to say, oh yeah, I understand that. I know what that is.
yeah.
And yeah, I'm against it, or I'm for it, or
Yeah.
whatever.
But they don't really understand or aren't curious about understanding everything about it.
Yeah. And so I like the angle you're taking though with creativity, because creativity, it needs fuel and inspiration. And the trap that I fall into is if I'm just pulling from the same sources
Yeah.
and I stop investigating different things, I tend to get stuck in a rut. I tend to put out some of the same kind of stuff. And so curiosity is a way that I open myself up to other ideas and different inspiration, and it enriches the things that I create.
Yeah.
But it's also, I think, really, curiosity is really important for developing empathy. And empathy is a huge, in fact, like we should, you know, probably talk about empathy and creativity.
Yeah.
But the ability to think about the experiences of other people that you've never had, you know, those experiences you've never had, to think about, to be able to imagine the feelings and thoughts of other people, becomes a huge benefit when you're creating something, because it can shape the way that you create something. It can help you make something that will really resonate with people. And part of that comes intuitively, because if we're really in tune with ourselves and in tune with our own experiences, and we express from that, you know, there are definitely people who will resonate with that. But when you combine that with a deep understanding of the experiences and the feelings and thoughts of other people, I think it can make it even more impactful.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, you probably don't want me to do this, but I'm about to go on a lecture about the book banning stuff and how
Oh no, don't. Stop.
that is a measure of empathy that we're taking away from children, because we're saying you can't read these books because it provides a different perspective from what we want you to know.
Yeah.
And
Well, and
that is going to limit creativity in the future.
I want to add some nuance up here at the top of this conversation, because as soon as you mention what side you fall on, there's a certain person who will tune out, and I don't want you to tune out, because there's a difference between, okay, I would say that neither of us is fully against book banning just as a concept.
I mean, maybe not you, but I am.
Well, let me say it this way.
Okay.
So there is, I think there needs to be discretion. Like, you know, we've had with our boys, there are certain books that we would not let them read before a certain age in our home. Like,
Yeah.
we've made those decisions for our own family. As a society, I think there's some room for those conversations to happen. Like, are these ideas not dangerous, but do our kids have the framework to be able to understand these ideas? You know, like, we wouldn't keep romance novels in our home. So, like, those
Just
kinds of
because
things.
I don't read them, but no, but I will say that back when we had younger kids, I was a different person than I am now. And I know kids a lot better now because I've been a children's book author for a while, and they're a lot smarter than we give them credit for.
They are, yeah. And
so that's where I fall on it, is that
yeah. So the
kids
approach,
can handle these things even though adults can't.
the more recent approach to book banning has been, in my opinion, it's been based on bad faith arguments about specific
Groups.
Yeah, it's and it's been very broad stroke, kind of like, oh, if there's even one mention, it doesn't matter the context, it doesn't matter. And so it's been very much like, hey, let's give parents a machete and just let them hack away. So I agree with you.
Yeah.
On that front.
And what I fear, I mean, I go visit schools and I talk to kids about creativity, and, you know, I tell them, you have to have curiosity. You have to investigate things. You have to, like, question deeper things. And what I fear is that if they don't have books that open their minds in that way, then it's almost like the branches of a tree. Then we've cut off several branches of the creativity tree.
Well, and what it seems like it's trying to accomplish is excluding certain individual expressions from the box of who a person is supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, you know, it's trying to give students an identity by way of exclusion. And so people who actually have that identity don't see themselves represented in literature, and don't get that there's a euphoria that comes from, and it's not like a euphoria in the sense of like this feeling that washes over you. But when you read a book, and straight people, and I'll just, like, a certain class of people aren't even aware that this is happening. When they read books, they make assumptions about the characters because for so long it's just been one representation. And so there isn't this feeling, like, you're not even consciously aware of the fact that, oh yeah, I'm recognizing myself in this person, because that's been the default for so long. People who haven't had that experience, who then do, there's a sense of euphoria that comes from, oh, hey, this person looks like me. This person has grown up experiencing the same things I have. This person is struggling with the same questions I am. Kids of all ages experience things that should be represented in media and should be represented in literature in a way that validates their experience, so that they feel understood. They don't feel ashamed to ask questions. And I feel like the general approach is we're trying to tell kids who they should be, instead of asking them, who are you?
Yeah.
You know, like,
Well, and I'll just add that seeing themselves in books, and I can attest to this as a female who often, you know, the things that I read as a kid were written by males or had male protagonists, and there were not usually like go get 'em kind of females in literature, but it validates their experience, it validates who they are, and it validates, you know, their future. But I'll also add that for the people who don't have that experience, and this goes back to what we're talking about with empathy, but it helps them understand what it's like.
yeah, and
That's
that's the other. I was thinking about that, and I failed to like go into that part of it, but
yeah,
that's super important. Like, we still hear about our eighth grader
yeah,
came home and said some kids were making fun of his backpack because it's a girl's color. It's like a light. It doesn't matter.
it doesn't matter. We've raised them to not have boy girl
But
colors.
but that kind of experience, like that kind of, you know, a kid who says that is not coming from a place of empathy and understanding. They're not coming from a place of curiosity.
And that's
So-
sad. Like
and-
already in 8th grade, the place of curiosity has kind of been, you know, snipped off.
So, and our school district, and I imagine many others around the world, but our school district is very anti-bullying. You know, they have the posters all over the place, but you can't do that and then disregard the identity of people who you think aren't normal or who shouldn't be accepted, and expect kids not to bully one another when they see that in somebody else. Now, what I've observed, besides that one situation, is it seems like the students are much more tolerant with one another, and they are finding, you know, they're finding community and acceptance. But it's still, it's like you're totally undermining
Yeah.
when you're banning books and you're trying to quiet those stories, you're undermining
Yeah.
your message.
It's passive aggressive bullying. Bullying doesn't always look like fists and physical things, but
Yeah.
well, we got way off, but
Yeah, sorry. The book,
we don't have any feelings whatsoever about this stuff.
yeah. And I'm not even going to try to build a bridge between that
Yeah.
and the main, but I mean, it is, I think empathy and curiosity really do go hand in hand.
Well, I mean, it's,
Curiosity is how you develop empathy.
Yeah.
And so, and it's such an important tool in your creator toolkit.
but also if kids are wondering and wanting to ask those questions, and then they don't have books that answer those questions, you know, it's like, that's like I said, it's like snipping off the branch of the creativity tree, you know?
Yeah.
So
All right. So final round. How do we maintain or foster curiosity? So I'm a naturally curious person, but not, you know, not everybody is that way, or not everybody grows up in an environment that it encourages curiosity. What are some things we can do to foster that, to kind of reintroduce that into our lives?
I mean, I will always plug reading. I think reading is one of the best ways that we can rediscover our curiosity, especially reading nonfiction stuff. But even fiction can lead us into little holes of wondering.
Yeah, and I'd add to that, reading outside of your personal like sphere of influence.
Yeah.
I think can be, when I started looking into things that were kind of challenging to my ideologies and stuff like that. That was when I started to, you just see different facets of things and issues and stuff like that.
Yeah. I'll say too that magazines, like we subscribe to National Geographic and the science magazine Discover, what is National Geographic History, Psychology Today, some of those like really interesting magazines can foster our curiosity as well. I've gotten so many story ideas from just magazine stuff.
Yeah, I think podcasts. We've got a
trash truck.
Yeah, I always forget what trash truck, dump truck.
It's not a dump truck. That's for construction.
Not. A trash. Yeah.
Garbage collector.
Garbage truck. It's a garbage truck coming through. So we're gonna take a second, and then I'll finish my point. We'll just kind of banter here in the meantime.
Banter.
Do you like that word?
Yeah.
When you are touching the desk,
is it making a noise?
It's making the microphones.
Oh, what am I supposed to do?
We don't want to shake the microphones.
Take a drink.
Yeah. All right, I think we're in the clear. So I'm gonna jump back in. Podcasts are also really good.
I haven't gotten into podcasts, but I think it's because I just want to read.
Yeah.
Like when I have time to listen to something, I listen to audiobooks.
Yeah. I think the thing I enjoy about podcasts or the thing I have enjoyed, I haven't been listening a lot lately, but we're doing a podcast.
I know.
It's really,
I shouldn't have said that, should I? I realize that now.
If we were trying to, put the same information into audiobook format, like it would be a completely different experience. Yeah. And you might miss some of the
nuance of conversation.
Like we wouldn't write a book about curiosity and creativity and have a section about book banning,
I don't know, maybe.
So, yeah, and so making a habit of consuming things outside of your sphere of influence. There was also something really fun that we did with the kids for a while. It was called the Wonder Wall, and it was just a tack board. And if they had a question about something, we couldn't answer immediately. They would write it down on a piece of paper, and we'd tack it up there with the intention of kind of researching it. And I don't, maybe you don't have curious kids in your life, but if you're just going throughout your day, kind of thinking about like looking at things and
write down your questions.
Like for example, I went for a run one morning, and as I was running along, I saw a fire hydrant. Most people, like when you're out, you don't even notice they're there, but like the fire hydrants are everywhere. And then like some of them are different colors, and then they're spaced out a certain distance. And so I started to like, why are they different colors? Why are they shaped the way they are? How are they connected to the main water line?
Yeah. How
do they keep from leaking? Why are they spaced out as much as they are? I can guess at the answers to some of those things, but there's probably, kind of a rich history behind what we have now as modern day fire hydrants.
Yeah. And who knows how you could use that in art eventually,
Yeah. Who knows? I mean, and that's kind of the fun of it, is like when you follow your curiosity, you have no way of knowing how or if that's going to come through in your creativity, but then sometimes it can come through in surprising ways.
Yeah, it's the connections and the metaphors, and the more things that you're curious about, the more connections and metaphors and things you have at your fingertips to use in your art.
Yep. My love is like a fire hydrant.
Okay. So you could write a song about, but you don't have the questions answered yet. So
Right. I gotta do that.
I will say too, being involved with children, even if you don't have your own children, is a really good way to reignite your curiosity too. Like just spending a little bit of time with children as a mentor or as a school visit person.
Yeah.
It's always fun. Like whenever I do school visits and then I open it up to questions, I always write down their questions because it's just so fun to see the ways that kids' brains work and the things they're curious about. And it always reminds me, I should, even if I feel dumb asking a question, I should be braver about, following those things.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for today's episode. It was a fun conversation. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in. Rachel, if folks want to find you online, where can they find you?
RachelTolson.com, and I'm at Rachel Tolson on all the things.
Yep. And I'm at BenTolson.com, and I'm also at Ben Tolson on all of the things. If you want to help out the show, leave a review, share it with a friend. We love being able to do this and share it with you, and we want to help as many people as we can with these conversations. So that would mean a lot to us if you hear an episode that really resonates that you think would be great for someone else to hear. Share that with them. You can find all of our published episodes at intheboatpodcast.com, and you can share them that way, or you can look through our YouTube channel where we stream these live every week, and you can link to them that way. Thanks for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time. All right, after show. We got into the book banning, but we didn't get into other things. Was that our front door?
I don't know.
Sounded like our front door. I'm going to go check.
Okay.
I mean, the wind blew also, but I'm going to go check.
It's the wind.
So you talk.
Okay. I'm not sure what he meant by other things, but I think there might be a storm blowing in. We got lucky and it didn't come yet while we were streaming. Is it just the wind picking up?
Yeah, I think so.
We had an Amazon delivery that was supposed to be delivered too, so it could have been that.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe somebody walked by. Anyway, so what did you mean by other things?
Well, no, I'm not going to. You're curious?
Yeah, I am.
So I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about certainty.
Oh, yeah, we didn't get into that.
We kind of did. We just didn't I don't know that we use that word as much, but that I think is so certainty.
That's the wind.
Yeah, the wind is really picking up. I don't know if it's coming through the microphones, but our garage door keeps creaking because the wind's pushing against it. So certainty is kind of a value, like it's a value in religious circles, and especially in the ones that I grew up. It's kind of like the whole, and so I didn't want to get into that side of it, but only to say that in my upbringing, the idea of certainty and knowing the things that you know, and being certain of what you need, like those are really important. And so I wasn't ever explicitly told, hey, you can't question or you can't doubt anything, like there was actually, I think, kind of the teachings around the ideas of doubt and stuff like that were kind of a mixed bag from what I recall. But the idea of certainty, it was one of those things that, like, the way they taught this implied things about things like doubt and questions, that they didn't have to say explicitly. And so that was, I think, in our culture, certainty is valued. Like, you want to follow, if you're, there's that analogy of like, there's a group of people lost in the woods. Who are you going to follow? The guy who says, let's go that way. That's the way out.
Yeah.
Or the guy who says, I think it's that way.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to follow the person
who's certain. Yeah.
Yeah. But the guy who's certain ends up, leading
Everybody
them
dies.
deeper into the woods, and they all die.
And they all die together. Yeah. That's the end of a grim fairy tale that we love.
So I think at best, certainty should be viewed with a fair amount of skepticism. And I think in many ways, certainty is the opposite of curiosity. Because certainty, it's, like I was saying earlier, certainty is the end of the line. It's like,
there are no more questions.
We can't go anywhere from here.
Yeah.
And at worst, I think certainty can wreak havoc. I think it creates situations where, because there's no room for curiosity, people can no longer learn new things. They're not open to new information.
Yeah.
And that's actually scary. Like, when you play that out practically, that's scary.
I was just reading, I think it was last month's Psychology Today. They had a story about the ever-changing nature of science and how science exists to prove what has been proven before wrong. Like, that's the nature of science, is that you're constantly trying to prove what has already been established wrong.
Yeah.
And how in our culture we're so uncomfortable with that, because we want something to be like, when it's proven right, we want it to be right all the time. We don't want anybody to come in and say, wait a minute, this experiment wasn't done in the exact way we wanted, or we've learned better ways to do this experiment, and now we're going to do it this way, and new information has come about. And so it was really interesting about the psychology of our brains and how, we're so uncomfortable with that uncertainty and the evolving nature of certainty.
Yeah. And that's, that's a feature. That's just a feature of the human brain. Like, the way we survive and the way we interact with the world depends on us being able to say, this is this way.
Yeah.
And that is that way. Like, to be able to look at a rock and to say, that's a thing I can stand on, and to look at a cactus and say, that's a thing that will poke me and hurt me if I, so there's like, the more abstract something is, the more difficult it is for us to feel comfortable interacting with it. It takes a lot of energy. Like, that's another thing too. Like, the way the body works and the way the brain works is it conserves energy. It takes shortcuts to conserve energy as much as possible. And one of the ways our brain takes shortcuts is by categorizing things and putting things in boxes and saying, okay, this thing is this thing. And now I know what that thing is, and it doesn't have to change anymore. Because if it changes, then I have to think about it, and I have to use energy to think about it.
Yeah.
So like, it makes sense that we are that way.
Yeah. And there's something scary. This is the last thing I'll say. There's something scary about, especially for me as a writer, knowing that whatever I write today is going to be around forever, Yeah. And so I have to remind myself, because you look back at some of the classic literature and the ways that they got things wrong and how they've come under fire for some of those things, but they kind of did the best they could in the environment where they were. Some of them,
Some of them,
some didn't ask the necessary questions, and that's valid. But as a writer, I have to tell myself often, you're doing the best you can now with the information that you have now and trying to do the least harm. And hopefully people in, 2200 will look back on my books and be like, yeah, she tried, if new information comes out and that kind of thing. So it's a scary thing, but I feel like I want to always be open to knowing, that what I wrote in my first book, we know more information now and I can make those amends, that kind of thing. Like it would be a hard thing to be like, oh, I was wrong about this, but staying open and staying curious about those things, we learn new things all the time.
Yeah. We're very afraid of the cost of
saying we're wrong.
Yeah. And that is also a way that you just completely close the door to curiosity, because I was having this conversation with one of the boys yesterday, because it was like, when you do something wrong and you try to hide it, we can't learn anything. As soon as you admit you were wrong, then you can start asking questions. Why did I do it this way? What were the circumstances?
What could I have done better?
What could I have done differently? Yeah. And then that opens the door to growth and change. And but like you in order to get there, you have to go through the discomfort of,
it's really uncomfortable.
Which as a parent, it really makes me want to make that part of it as
easier.
Comfortable as comfortable as possible.
Well, but that's not really realistic in the world either, so
it's not always. So it's a philosophy thing. I think that the people in my life who have no grace are people I don't let myself spend as much time around, because we're all going to make mistakes, and I would rather make mistakes with people who have grace and who, because the thing is, like, there are always going to be consequences. And so making that part of it easier, I think, you're not taking away the consequences of that action. And that was so, like, in this situation,
he has to pay for something.
Yeah, he has to pay for something. And he was still, like, I was really kind with him and gentle, and I made it easy, but he was still, like, upset.
Yeah.
And that was hard for him, So, like, I don't feel like I took anything away from that experience that would keep him from being able to go through something similar in the real world.
Yeah.
But it is, I mean, I guess it's important to also know that not everybody is going to be that gracious.
Yeah.
So.
We're way over our time, so we should.
Yeah. Sorry.
That was a long after show.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for sticking around. If you're still listening, have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you next time.
All right.